Hi there everyone, Lars back with another review and analysis for Kimi wa Meido-sama, brought to you by Camille's Harem, not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers, because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends, and this episode really pumped the brakes to give us some of the emotional development for both Yuki and for Hitoyoshi, because things are coming to a head, and this is not the turn that I expected the show to take with its penultimate episode. So without any further ado, let's dive into the events of this episode. It appears as though Riko's plan to get her brother together with Yuki has worked maybe just a little bit too well, at least for Hitoyoshi's liking, because you see, Hitoyoshi's feeling very hot under the collar after his date with Yuki and playing a little bit of footsie under the table. And now that she is coming every single night into his bed because it makes her feel a whole lot better to sleep there, he is getting even more flustered because, well, he's a teenage boy with a really hot girl in his bed. Things are going to happen, and Hitoyoshi does not want to go that far. At least not yet. And we find out in this episode why that is. And it's because he's scared of losing a very important connection. Because his mother has pretty much effectively abandoned him. Yeah, sure, she's still in his life, but as we will find out, she does not live with him at all, and it's by choice. So it's like having a mother, but not at all. She's not around for anything in his life. They basically communicate via text, and for the very rare times that he has the chance to go and visit her, she's kept him really at more than arm's length. And after that, he got to know this really cute girl. They became good friends, and he confessed to her, and she turned him down, saying, "You're just confessing because you feel lonely. It's not really me that you love the idea of having a relationship." And so when we consider that, Hitoyoshi's like, am I just projecting my longing desires onto Yuki, and I'm not really appreciating her for who she is? And what if it is love? I know Yuki well enough to realize that she's not a very mature person. She's still just figuring out what friendship and the likes is. If I share with her my feelings, if I tell her that I'm actually in love with her, if I am in love with her, she could turn me down, and that would destroy me. And so Hitoyoshi's having a very hard time figuring out how he should deal with Yuki, and unfortunately this begins to conflict with Yuki as well, because now that she's becoming more cognizant of her feelings, she's beginning to understand better and better what a normal girl is like, and she's been able to grab a hold of this new interesting life for herself. Hitoyoshi, who's so important to her, is now suddenly not paying as much attention to her. The communication is just not quite right. She can tell that something is up, and she feels like things have gone wrong. So now she's crying, and she doesn't understand why. And the miscommunications just keep on heaping up, and they're both of them, both Hitoyoshi and Yuki, are now just on this horrible roller coaster of suck, and are unable to really come to terms with how they're really feeling. It completely burns out Hitoyoshi, and Yuki just can't stop herself from crying or feeling like she's making massive mistakes. Well, when New Year's rolls around and Riko comes to pick them up to go to the shrine, Hitiyoshi's out cold, and Yuki doesn't really want to go anywhere because she's trying to still come to terms with what's happening. But then Hikage comes and is like, hey, she texts Yuki and is like, what if we went to go to the temple together? And Yuki decides, my friend needs me, I'm going to go, even though this is going to probably hurt Master Hitoyoshi, let me leave a note, and she goes. And when they go to the temple, they pray, and they get their fortunes, and Yuki starts bawling again, because her fortune seems to make it sound as though she's going to lose Hitoyoshi, and she doesn't want to. And Hikage's like, hey, look, what if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling sad about what's going on here, it's okay to cry. It's okay to let your emotions out, because you need to. You can't just keep them bottled up forever. And so Yuki lets out her emotions in the hopes of being able to just let herself process them, so that way she can be ready to have a true, honest conversation with Hitoyoshi. Bum, bum, bum! However, enter the father, who has finally come to Japan. And so it looks as though the finale for this season is going to be the confrontation with Daddy. Now, to do the analysis for this particular episode, I'm going to have to talk about what the episode delivers to us just on its face, and then compare it to what we get in the manga. Because while this was a nice episode and everything, it pales, in my opinion, in comparison to what the manga delivers, which is a much longer version of the events that we get here in this episode, and really goes into depth about what's happening with Yuki, her feelings, and also introduces to us who has been the narrator, at least through the manga. So let's dive into that. This episode is incredibly simplistic and straightforward for a penultimate episode. It has not brought together all of the loose threads that have actually been spun out in regards to Grace, Yuki's sister, Yuki's backstory, or anything like that. None of that's been addressed. All those threads are still out there in the open, and we only finally end with Hitayoshi's dad showing up. And we don't have much of an explanation as for why Hitayoshi's mother has distanced herself from her son. So there's all these questions, and there's really no way that the finale is going to be able to wrap up any of that. It seems as though the show is gunning for a second season where they can address all of those issues and start wrapping things up, delivering some payoff and everything for all of the setup. So really, this is just an episode about Yuki trying to work through these newfound feelings of hers and come to terms with that she's now a girl who experiences emotions like everyone else. And being someone who was just this cold-blooded assassin who threw away everything that didn't seem to be necessary for her work, and emotions definitely get in the way of just murdering people when you're told to, she's now having to come to grips with really what it means to be a regular person, which is you're going to have to deal with all of those emotions. And if you don't know how, what is it that you can do? Akagi's like, just let the emotions flow. And this is something where we learn as we grow up that, yeah, you need to keep some of your emotions in check, especially some of the more negative ones, but there's other times where you need to let people know that you are sad, where you need to let people know that you're happy, where you need to let people know that you're in love, where you need to let people know that you're depressed, or you need to let people know that you're so full of energy that you're about to just rip right through a brick wall. There's times where you gotta let people know what's really in your heart. Other times where you have to say, no, close it off to other people, and when I am in private, I can work my way through it, or with someone who I'm very close to, someone that I can trust, such as, for Yuki, Hitoyoshi, Riko, or Akagi. And so really that's what this episode's about. It's a very simple one in terms of emotions, and it is effectively what is going to help these two really overcome this hump and start bridging the gap between them, this gap of miscommunication when it comes to their feelings. After all, this is a rom-com, and we expect these two characters to eventually get together. What is the solution? The solution is better communication. The solution is not to bury their feelings, but come to terms with them and express them to the people who matter to you. That is important. That's healthy. And honestly, that's normal. That is the core of this episode. Now, we do get some interesting revelations about Hitayoshi's life, and it really should put our heart out to this poor guy. And it begins to make a little bit more sense about why he was such a brat and why he doesn't want Yuki to find out about that stage of his life, or why his best friends were really there for him. Because if his mother and father really weren't there for him, and his crush wasn't, it becomes very clear that Hitoyoshi was basically isolated. And if it hadn't been for his friends there to kind of help him through this, he might have gone really far in his delinquency stage and maybe wouldn't have turned out to be the sweet cinnamon roll that we've seen him be throughout most of the show. So that's an important little revelation right there for Hitoyoshi, and it then makes sense why he feels so conflicted about his father coming back. If his mother abandoned him, shouldn't his father at least have stepped in? Well, his father, who is there kind of pulling the strings of bills, which is important, but also of what he should be doing in his life, but really has kept himself even further away than mom, then I can imagine that Hitoyoshi especially doesn't feel all that generous towards his dad. Now, this is where the manga really comes in. So if you don't want these spoilers, then you know what? Fantastic. I'm happy that you are here. And please make sure that you leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already done so. Share out this video. And I hope that you're enjoying Kimi wa Meido-sama. But if you really want to dive into this, then buckle on up. Okay. Whew. So in the manga, Everything that we got here in this episode goes on 4 chapters. Not just 1 or 2 chapters, not just 3 or 4. We are going on not quite 10, but we're looking at like 7, 8 chapters of full-on exploration and development into what Yuki is feeling. And she is an absolute wreck, and we come to understand even more so why she buried her feelings, because in the manga we get to see the assassination of her parents, and we begin to understand a little bit better about how she got brought into the world of assassins, and the door starts getting opened up even more for even darker and bloodier and far more cruel and depressing revelations for Yuki's backstory. And this just at least gives us a taste of what happened, helps us to understand, holy cow, this is why she buried her emotions. This is why she couldn't be a normal girl, not just because she was an assassin, but because of the horrible things that happened to her. We also realize that Yuki is not acting at full 100% like she should. She was an absolute prodigy, the daughter of 2 very talented individuals and the sister of another very talented prodigy. So Yuki's got all these inlaid skills, all these inbred skills that she could tap into, but she doesn't, she can't, because she instead was broken and transformed into an assassin. We also learn a little bit more about Hitoyoshi's friend, and spoiler alert, it is Yuki's sister. And this begins to open up a huge can of worms, which is explored a little bit later in the manga, far later than where we are currently within the general story. And you come to realize just how separate Yuki and her sister are, which is going to lead to a massive clash later on down the road. This is what Grace has been working on, and this is what we are slowly building up towards. And after this whole revelation and all of this character development, the world of assassins is going to come crashing down on top of Yuki, and things are going to take some very dark turns in the future. And we're also going to start getting a little bit more into the supernatural elements that are hinted at a little bit earlier within the story. Now, the anime has jumped over a lot of that stuff. It has not incorporated most of that, and that's because the anime has decided to focus primarily on the rom-com aspect of the overall story. And that makes sense for everything that they're trying to set up, but it means that we're lacking a lot of world-building context to make sense of why Yuki is feeling the way that she does. And in these chapters, we are given the identity of the narrator of the manga. The anime hasn't had a narrator, and I think it's a good thing that that narration has been removed, so that way we can focus way more on the characters. But in the manga, we are given the identity of the narrator, and it turns out it's Yuki's parents who are watching over her and who have acknowledged that Yuki is actually in love with Hitoyoshi. She just doesn't understand it yet, and they say there's a long journey ahead of her in order to not only recognize that she's in love, but to actually express that she's in love. And why is that the case? Because she is such a broken individual. If you thought she was weird and clunky beforehand, you don't know the half of it. And that leads into some of the crazier and darker revelations much later in the manga, as we get to meet other big villains, or as Yuki comes face to face with the consequences of her past. Now, this leads to the question of adaptation. Why has the anime done what it's done within this episode, rather than incorporate a very important bit of Yuki's backstory? Why have we focused more on just the coming to terms with feelings and the rom-com aspect? And again, I think it's because of what the anime wishes to do. It's very clear that they want to get a second season, and I hope that they get it. And I think what they've decided is that this important information about Yuki's backstory can be far easier folded in for when she has to confront her sister later on. Instead, let's focus on the relationship immediately between Yuki and Hitoyoshi and see how they are growing as friends and as a potential couple. So a lot of that information has to then be punted elsewhere. And again, this works out for what the anime wishes to focus on, but what this also means is that this penultimate episode feels almost lazy in comparison to everything else, because it's not delivering everything that it should, at least according to the manga. And also this means that we're not getting the full breadth and scope of just who Yuki is and how incredible her advancement, her progression has been, and what that really means for her relationship with Hitoyoshi. And so I feel like the anime has unfortunately been leaving gold on the table in order to focus on just one part of the story. Again, the manga itself is a pretty precarious juggling act between a spy thriller, a supernatural horror story, and a rom-com. And by focusing on just the rom-com aspect throughout this anime, as someone who has read the manga, it's very clear that the manga is the superior story because of everything that is communicated and everything that it's able to do by blending these genres together rather than just focusing on one. So what the anime has done overall, I find to be rather appealing. I've enjoyed it, but by the time that we get to the penultimate episode, it's very clear that there are weaknesses in this particular approach, that there's so much more that we could have gotten into, but we didn't, and that instead they want the finale to be the confrontation with the dad, and with Yuki and Hitoyoshi making up, and then going on to the next big leg of their adventure together. This is a real gamble for the anime to take, because how many anime have gotten the axe after their first season when they wanted to get more? Quite a few. So I hope that they get the chance for a second season, because there's so much more to the story that I think that people will enjoy, and I really hope that we get to see that, because I personally believe that the manga at least deserves that much. But this is a risk. We're going to have to see what happens. We'll have to see what happens in the final episode. I've got my fingers crossed that everything is going to work out, but it falls short of the ambition, of the scope, the detail, the fantastic world building and character building of the manga. And I'm hoping that the finale can at least give us something solid that will really make up for kind of the lackluster penultimate episode. Again, the central message is really good, but I'm not sure that it carries the weight that it needed to really set up whatever it is that they wish to do with the finale. It feels like we're really on the falling resolution after the sports festival, and the sports festival is just a fun moment that just helps to set up bigger things later on that should not have been the climax of the story. Not at all. So, yeah, difficulties in adaptation. And if you want to see the far better story, in my opinion, go and read the manga. You will enjoy it. So, with all of that being said, once again, a little outro right here. If you'd like to support the work that we do here at Camille's Harem, then please make sure that you like, comment, share, subscribe. That helps us out. Even more so, we'll be checking out the books that we have published. Links for them are in the description below. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible adventure that we call writing, even if it sometimes takes some frustrating deviations and bends and turns. It is most definitely, absolutely worth it. And until the next video, y'all, tschüss.